So what they do is they go in and they're primarily focusing in like the Sun Belt states, right? Like everyone else is. And they go in, they buy the land, they clear it, and they do the permitting process, but they stop. They call it shovel ready. So
Mm-hmm.
they don't do sewers, they don't do roads, but they get that process started for the builder because that takes a lot of
They do
time.
all the engineering.
Correct. Yep. So all
Yeah.
the engineering, the planning, getting the permits, clearing it. But like I said, they stop it. They don't do streets or sewers. And then they sell that to most of them are national builders,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But that frees their money up because that ties them out for almost 12 to 18 months that they literally just come in and they start building. So the profit is made in between us leveraging the builder's time and money during that first part of that process. It was something
Right.
new to me
Awesome.
that
Love
I'm
it.
learning about too. But Gary Keller says buy dirt. So
Yeah. Welcome to Everything Life and Financial Freedom. We are your hosts, Linda and Jim McKissack. If you know our story, you know that we went from over $600,000 in debt to having financial freedom. We share some of the insights and practical tips that we've learned over the last 30 years for achieving financial freedom, building wealth, and building an extraordinary life. Let's get started with today's episode. Hey, Jim, I am super pumped today because our amazing guest, Klarissa Skinner, and I actually did an event not too long ago on a webinar, and she lit me up.
We all are going to learn a lot off this.
Yeah,
Deal.
I want to learn from this girl. And isn't that why people have a podcast? Which, by the way, our podcast, for those of you that are new to the podcast, we're just two average people that decided one day we wanted an above average life. We wanted to live an extraordinary life and started seeking the answers of how you create financial freedom so you have that.
Yep.
So hopefully you guys out there are just average people like Jim and I, and you want an extraordinary life too. And I'm going to tell you, Klarissa is going to help you figure out how to do it because she has definitely done that. So Klarissa, welcome.
yes, thank you for having me today.
Thanks for being here.
Wow. Super excited. Wow. I'm going to just say you were born and then what happened, Cliff Note version, because you have so much great material to get to. I want us to get there as quick as possible, but I do love to have background on people. So you were born and then what happened?
Born and raised in Kansas City. Lived here my whole life. Go Chiefs. I then got into real estate. I went to college. I grew up in a great household. My mom actually sold real estate. That's how I got into real estate. My mom moved to be an MCA about 4 hours away from Kansas City. And she was like, "Hey, who's going to take over my business?" And I was like, "Oh, me, I will." I wish I would have done it sooner. But we all say that. So I had been in real estate for almost, I would say 3 or 4 years, and I actually primarily work with investors. And everyone was always like, "Oh, what investment properties do you have?" And I was like, I don't. And I couldn't figure out why. Like I was like, I would see the success. I would help people do these great like flips or rentals, and I just couldn't figure out why I couldn't pull the trigger. So with a little help from my MAPS coach, and things like listening to like the CEO podcast from Gary Keller, kind of understanding, I kind of really had to take a dive into my own self to figure out why I couldn't pull the trigger. So I figured out that I needed enough reserves to make sure I could pay my bills for an entire year. Now, some might say that's a little excessive, but to me, that's how I can sleep at night. So I was able to build that reserve. And at the end of 2020, I invested in my first apartment syndication deal because I felt safe enough that not every tenant was going to move out of that apartment, right?
Yeah.
And luckily, one of my clients was one of the general partners on that deal. And I know that she can underwrite a deal like nobody's business, right? Like it's very numbers, there's no emotion. Then quickly after that, I did another one with a different partner, another apartment syndication deal. And then I bought my first out-of-state single-family rental property.
So let's go back a minute because I don't even know. And we've been investing, 20, 30 years. at least.
Yeah.
I don't even know what apartment syndication is. So I love that you can learn something new every day. So let's go back. And for the audience that doesn't know, what does apartment syndication even mean? And then if somebody wanted to do that, how would you tell them to go find a way to get into that? So what is it and all that
So
stuff?
apartment syndication is, there'll be usually a grouping of people. They find most of the time an off-market apartment complex, ranging from, it could be anywhere from 12 units up to 300. They go in, normally it's a value add situation. So they raise money for the down payment and the improvements they're going to do. And normal improvements is, updating the actual units themselves, if they're stuck in the 1970s, normally adding green space, laundry, updating laundry rooms, playgrounds, things like that help bring that extra higher rent and bring better tenants to it. So you almost kind of buy into a share, right? So like if they're going to raise $1 million for the down payment and the value add, they turn around and, you can invest, most of the time, the minimum is 50,000. So, anywhere between 50 and up to whatever amount. Sometimes they cap it that you feel comfortable with. And then after that, they close and you get a monthly distribution or quarterly, depending on how they do it. And then when they go to sell the property in 5 to 7 years, there's usually a multiplier. And right now it's usually about 1.8%. So if you invest 50,000, you get back 75 when they sell, plus your quarterly distributions.
And so they buy these usually to sell. So it's not like they're going to hang on to them forever and it's take you forever to get your money back. They're actually going to sell.
Correct.
So, and you happen to have a client who did that. That's how you found them, right? If you were giving advice to somebody that says, hey, I might be interested in this, I don't like the headaches of tenants and all that stuff. How would the average person go find something like this?
I would get on like your local investor groups, locally, or, things like Bigger Pockets or other investor forums, because there's plenty of people who are doing apartment syndications. If you just start asking, I would just, make sure you vet them, understand their background. Yes. Have they ever done this? A trick that I do is I always look where the nearest Starbucks and Chick-fil-A is. That's just my own little thing, only because I know that Starbucks and Chick-fil-A do a lot of market research before they ever put a store in that area.
Yeah. Love it. Love it. Okay. So you did that first. Once I love what you said, because Jim and I had a whole group of painters one time in our strategy room that we were teaching wealth building to, and we got all the way to the end and they all loved everything we said. And then half of them said, but my wife is afraid to do anything like this. How in the world would I get her on board? And I love that what you did is you knew that about yourself, that you needed more security, because one of the advices that we gave to them is, well, find out from your wife, how much money would she have to have? And I'm sorry, this was just happened to be all men, painters, like paint contractors, like $1 million paint contractors. These guys were very successful. And their wives needed a little more security than they needed. They were a little more risk takers. And that's what we said to them was, why don't you ask them, how much money would I have to have put away or secure so that you could feel secure about doing this? And I love that, because that's what you had to do for your own self. So somebody listening, they may not be pulling the trigger because the security is important to them. And I love this, that you figured this out about yourself and you did that.
Yeah, that was very important to me, that I knew I could pay my bills. I was like, if anything, within a year, I can find another job if for some reason the world goes crazy, right? And then even I set a precedent on my first out-of-state rental that I put 6 months of mortgage and there is an HOA in there. So if I had that security. Actually, the first one I did a year, because I was like, I have to have that security. And then the next two, I only did 6 months.
And was this a VRBO or is this a long-term rental that you got?
Long-term rental.
Okay.
Yep.
And what made you buy out of state?
So that was the other thing, is I could not pull the trigger here in Kansas City. We have a great rental market, but I'm too emotional. I would overthink it. I couldn't get past it. And I'm nosy. So I'll drive by, and if that grass isn't mowed, I'm going to be banging on the door, asking you to mow that grass. So I decided it was much easier for me to buy out of state, because all it was numbers. There was no emotion. So did it cash flow? was I buying right? You know what I mean? Like, and luckily I had I sell with a capital group here in Kansas City. So I bought the property through them. So there was already a tenant in place. It was already inspected. They already had the property management company and all of that. So all I had to do was wire my funds.
So what do you mean by capital group?
So they go in, it's kind of like a turnkey company, but they don't actually like renovate the properties, but they go in and buy like developments. So my first one happens to be in a condo. They bought the whole condo facility, and then they sold them off one by one.
Okay.
To different investors.
Okay. Gotcha. All right. So out of state, this was an out of state condo. What state was it in? Is it a bordering state? Did you go like 14 states across, or where'd you go?
North Carolina.
North Carolina. Okay. That's a great market. So yeah, that makes sense. Is there any particular reason why you picked North Carolina?
Nope. I picked this one just because at that point it was also lower price point. So I felt like if I could sell it quickly, or I needed to sell it quickly, I could. So it was more of a comfort level.
Clarissa's a girl after my own heart. She has backup plan and then backup plan to backup plan. I love you, girl.
And the number one reason people can fail in real estate investing is they're over leveraged. And so you having the backup and being able to put the money down on the front end is, it's a pretty safe bet.
Yeah. Love it. Yep. Okay. So what do we do next? Because you talked about debt validation earlier when we talked, but what'd you do next after the out of state one?
So I ended up investing in 6 more apartment syndications. And then I bought 2 more out of state single family long-term rentals. One was a new build in Memphis, Tennessee. And the other one is a condo or a townhome in Oklahoma City.
Okay. And how'd you find those properties?
So the syndications, both through one of my clients, and my cousin actually owns a capital company as well, that they do apartment syndications. And then the other 2 single families were through that group again, the same company I bought North Carolina from.
Yeah. So if people were looking for this kind of company in their area, how would they find them?
I would reach out to actually like a local agent first that deals with investments to help kind of get your feet on the ground. There's a lot of turnkey companies out there. You just got to be careful and make sure you do vetting on them. Right.
Yeah. So the thing about a capital company is they're basically a turnkey company.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it took quite a bit of capital for you to do this in the period of time that you did it in. How did you raise the funds for you to have enough money to put down on these properties?
So remember when I couldn't pull the trigger, I was just hoarding money. Did that come from your sales? Yep. So some of it came from my real estate business. And then some of it, I did sell my first home when I moved in with my husband. I decided not to keep it as a rental, which I know is everyone's like, what? But the equity from that deal I was able to invest in 2 syndications and buy one of those single family rentals. So I felt like the $200 cash flow that I was going to get from that was, I was able to 3 times that with what I was able to move that money into.
Right.
Yeah. And even like your syndications, that takes that takes cash too. It's kind of like, one of the things we say that we love about real estate investing is you just got to have the down payment. Whereas when you do stocks or whatever, you have to have the full amount. In this case, you had to have the full 50,000 to do that. So if somebody wants to do that, they really need to be conservative and save money and have money put away or have money access to them.
Yeah. And there actually is companies that they will buy. Like this is what my cousin does. He goes to the syndicator and says, I will fill $500,000. And then he turns around and lets people invest for 10,000, 25,000, because that was his way of him and his college buddies could actually invest, right? Because they all didn't have 50K. So he's actually a lawyer. So he was able to do all the K1s and the operating and all that. So not everyone can do that, but there's also groups like that you can do that.
And does he get an override of that, or he just got to get in cheaper?
He just got to get in cheaper.
Oh, love it. Love it. Oh, there's just opportunities everywhere. Okay. So let's talk about the debt validation. It's funny. I always say, we read tons of books when we were $600,000 in debt, trying to figure out who were the people that when crashes happen, they didn't lose everything like we did. And one of the things I kept hearing from people is to be the bank. And honestly, we've done that a little bit. We haven't done it a lot. So is that kind of what debt validation is?
Yes. So I am in a debt validation fund, and then I also fund personal notes. So like there's two different sides to that. So on the debt validation, it's kind of like an apartment syndication, but a group of us are buying debt that we have serviced, and then we get paid that interest when that debt is collected.
And so how do you find out what this debt is? This somebody that's behind on their debt, or what is this?
Kind of both, either behind or they're just buying a grouping of notes.
Okay.
Yeah. And what percentage will you usually buy those? What type of discount will you buy those notes at?
So on the debt validation, I'm not sure what kind of discount they bought it at. I just know that my cash on cash return is 20%.
Wow.
on that deal. Now, when I fund the personal notes, I am taking money, and I take a chunk of money, and I actually don't fund the entire note. I fund $25 of 1,500 notes. That way, if someone doesn't pay back, I only lose $25, but I get on that one, I get a 10% return on doing each individual. Now it takes time, and it's not as passive as a lot of people would like. But that one can quickly get your cash flow going. So I invested, I think it was $17,000, and I bought 700 notes at $25. Yep, that's about right. And I buy 3-year notes. And so I cash flow almost $2,000 a month.
Wow.
Give or take, depending on, some people pay off their loans earlier, this or that. So I'm able to build that cash flow up very, very quickly.
Okay. So where do you find those personal notes to be able to do that?
So there's a couple different websites. Lending Club used to be where people would do these. They were bought, and they can no longer do that, but I use prosper.com. If prosper.com is not available in your state, it's not in every state. You could
figure out which states.
Correct. Yep. And so there's just a portal, you put in money, and you can do auto recurring or set things, like you can see, like, have they missed any payments? What's their credit score, job, all of that. And most of these are for either debt validations or consolidations for bankruptcies, or maybe, they get a better rate for their motorcycle, RV, home improvement project. So you can see what they're using the money for as well.
So do you have any collateral on this stuff, or no? It's all risk.
It's all risk.
Okay. All right.
But that's why I only do $25 a note, is because if someone doesn't pay that particular note, I'm only out $25. So it kind of comes in the wash when I'm getting all this interest on, the other 699 notes.
So are other people, if you're only doing $25, are other people doing certain amounts too? And is the minimum 25 or the only amount 25?
The minimum is 25. You could fund the entire note if you wanted, but you would take that risk, right? So other people, it's kind of like a group funding of it. And then I think once it hits 80%, Prosper fully funds
the whole debt.
The whole debt. Yes, correct. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So sometimes you think you have something, and then they fall out. So you really have to pay attention when you're buying these, because if you don't log in for 3 months, you won't have bought all the notes that you thought you had bought.
Because what happens to them in that 3 months?
Because if they don't fund, like, let's say they don't hit the 80%, then it doesn't fund.
Oh, it doesn't make.
Right.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, it doesn't.
So what's the difference between personal note and debt validation?
So debt validation, I'm in a group. It's kind of like the apartment syndication, where we all came together and put in $50,000 each for them to buy a package. So I'm with other people, and I get a distribution, but the personal notes, I'm doing that my own self. So they're just kind of two different.
And so how do you,
the debt validation is just kind of at a bigger level. What I'm doing for the personal notes is just at a bigger level.
Are those notes collateralized on the personal notes?
No.
On the personal notes, no. On the debt validation, I do think they have some sort of collateral, but I would never see that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so how did you originally find those groups? And then how did you vet them?
So the debt validation came from a group that I had done some apartment syndications with. They get into other stuff as well. They were kind of getting into some Bitcoin mining and things like that. I didn't invest in the Bitcoin. I was actually too late. It filled up within minutes. So that came from them. That is with McKenna Capital. You could Google them and follow.
What's the name of it?
McKenna Capital.
Okay.
And then the personal notes I learned from a friend on how to do it. So actually the notes you leverage. So it's kind of like interest rate arbitrage. So the money that I'm using, I'm pulling from my universal life insurance. So I am being my own bank. And so I pay you probably can't get the same interest rate from when I set this up, but I pay 2.89% interest on the money I loan myself to invest in those personal notes, but I get a 10% return on those personal notes. So what I do is I take that money, invest it, and when I get the payment back, I just pay that down, and then I rebuy a whole nother grouping of notes.
Gotcha.
So it just keeps stacking and stacking.
Hello. Thank you for listening to the Everything Life and Financial Freedom podcast. For transcripts, resources, and more, visit the episode page on the podcast website at everythinglifeandfinancialfreedom.com. You can also download our Freedom Number worksheet. This worksheet will help you determine the amount of passive income you need to generate each year to sustain the lifestyle you have or the lifestyle you want when you no longer wish to work or simply want the freedom of your time and your money.
Cool.
What's your motivation to do this? I know for Jim and I, it was freedom. We didn't ever want to be in a situation where somebody could take everything away and, we'd have nothing left. What's your, I mean, a lot of this is cash flow still though, right? Because when it's paid off, I mean, it's not going to come in passively forever. You're young. So you've got plenty of time, but, what are your, I mean, they're great returns, excellent returns. But are you doing anything that is long-term passive and create leverage and passive income?
So some of it would be those single families, because I am young, right? And I have a great real estate business. So I don't use any of this cash flow. So anything is just reinvested back in. So like when I get my cash flow from my single family properties, that is just my reserves for the next one, when I can pull that out. Or the apartments, I don't touch any of that money. It sits in an account. And when it hits a certain amount, I'm able to invest in another one.
Gotcha.
So all of that. So, but the reason why I am investing is for freedom, right? So if I don't want to continue to sell houses forever, I don't have to, right?
Yeah.
And it gives me freedom. I actually volunteer almost every day at the animal shelter. One, I get to do that because of this, and I get to do it because I've built a great real estate business. So.
Yeah. I love it. Well, and Jim and I are perfect examples of life can happen and there's unexpecteds. Our industry could get disintermediated. I mean, there's just so many things that could happen that, and you're a woman of backup plans. So I love that because the single families would be the passive and freedom that eventually comes from it. But I love all these other things because it's great ways to stockpile cash so that you can go out and invest in the single families.
And for some things, it could be harder in this market to go out and find single family homes or something like that to invest in. And so, these are really good things that give you a great return in a typically low return market.
So let's talk about the out of state ones. How'd you go about finding them? And, what all did you have to know to feel secure to be able to invest in another state?
I used that company that we had talked about earlier. So I just reached out to them and said, hey, I'm ready to buy a property. This is how much I have for down payment closing costs. And they sent me property. So I pretty much just tell them, hey, when I'm ready to do it. And most of them, they just met, they all cash flowed. I could sell them quickly. They'd be first time home buyer homes if I needed to sell them quickly. And I just did market research, right? So North Carolina, Memphis, Tennessee, and Oklahoma City. So they're all kind of Midwest states to me. So that makes me feel a little bit comfortable as well. And they also have more friendly laws towards landlords as well.
Yeah,
is another thing to look into.
So how does the capital company find these properties? Do you know?
Some of them they actually build. So like
Really?
my Memphis, Tennessee, they developed a whole neighborhood. And same with the Oklahoma property. They were actually the ones who developed the townhome community.
Wow, that's awesome. This is great.
So how many single family homes do you have?
I just have 3. I think I'm going to buy another one though. So,
I
but
bet you will.
Yes. So I also wanted to diversify because I was, I just wanted to have the different streams. So that's, I really look back at it as I did single family for a reason, right? Someone else is paying my mortgage down. I get to write off the interest, the depreciation, those benefits there. I did the apartments because it's a long-term savings account for me. I can't touch that money, but I also get to carry that depreciation through on my taxes, which helps cash flow on that end, and then I do the personal notes for certain, I'm trying to have 6 different
streams of income.
Right. And now I'm kind of to the point where before I was so afraid to invest that now my comfort level has changed. Now, don't think I'm just out there crazy. I still have a year's worth of reserves and, I'm very conservative, but now it's moving towards things of debt validation, businesses, even though the apartment is a business, but kind of moving, keeping real estate here, right? Because we all love real estate and know that it can do great things, but kind of venturing out a little bit to kind of create more income streams in different industries.
Oh, and I love that we talked earlier about, you said Gary Keller said buy dirt, which his shirt said. I think we all saw that. Buy dirt. I have my own buy dirt shirt because I believe in it too. So you went into what you call land entitlement fund. Talk to us about that.
Yep. So that came to me through actually my MAPS coach. She was investing in this group. So what they do is they go buy dirt or go buy land and they go and clear it, do all the permitting, the engineering, all of that. And it takes about a 12 to 18 month process, but they have multiple communities going on at one point in time. And then they sell these to national builders or local builders. Most of them are national though, because that helps free up the money and time for these builders. So then the builders just go in and hit the ground running. And so I actually get a monthly distribution from that. And it's about an 18% cash on cash return.
Gosh, that's awesome. So who matters. Who you hang out with matters.
Correct. And once you get into this and you actually start asking people or telling people, just like we all talk about, right?
Yeah.
You're like, oh, you own a rental? Oh, you do these? So if you just start talking about it, you might be surprised to, who your next door neighbor really is and what kind of investments they really have. I think more people do it than we realize.
Yeah,
So.
Absolutely. And like Jim and I, well, we've done a few of this, but most of this we haven't done ourselves. I'm excited to find something we haven't figured out and done. So I love it. So what have been your biggest lessons that you've learned from doing all of this that someone else could learn from?
Yep. So I think the biggest one is understanding yourself and I'm a big fan of The Psychology of Money, the book, because we all have a different, background on money, feelings about money, right? And they've changed and they can change. And I think I was so afraid that I was behind, right? Because I was hanging out with these people that were like, oh, I have all these rentals and this and that. And I was just like, I don't have anything, but you know what? You're doing more than the next person if you're analyzing deals, saving money for the down payment. And it just takes small steps. And once you start, it's a lot easier to keep it going. That first one, it's very hard to get that capital, but once you start getting all these cash flows, then all of a sudden it starts building on itself, right? So I think the biggest lessons for me was you just have to start somewhere. And you guys might do it, you guys do a lot of Airbnbs, I know. I don't really like Airbnbs, but guess what? That's okay because it fits your model and your comfort level, and these fit mine. So as long as we're all investing and making money, it doesn't matter, it doesn't matter, right? And kind of losing the judgment on that. And then also just understanding how money works, right? And this isn't I read one book and I'm done. you have to continue to learn about money and how it works and changes. And it will also change when your psychology of money changes, right? How I feel about money today is not how I felt about money the first time I let $50,000 go out of my bank account and was praying to Jesus that it worked out. Right. So it changes.
Well, and we talk on this podcast about how average people can have extraordinary lives. I mean, we're all not Bill Gates or Steve Jobs or any of those people, but we can have extraordinary lives by doing this kind of stuff. So you talked a little bit about the psychology of money. As we wrap up here, would there be any other great books that you would recommend to people that may be struggling with their mentality around money? Because you're changing your view on money, changed your whole life and your for generations probably.
Yes. So I would actually read The Lifestyle Investor by Justin Donald. He also has a podcast. I would also recommend listening. I mean, Gary Keller's CEO podcast really changed my view on money and make it simple. This does not have to be complicated, right? Just simple savings, set a standard for investments. Don't make it too complicated. And start out where your comfort level is. But I would definitely start, reading and listening to podcasts about money.
Yeah. Love it. Love it. Well, my gosh. I mean, we could talk to you all day, but we got to get busy and figure some of this stuff out for ourselves. So Klarissa, thank you. This has been super. Wow. That's all I'm going to say is just wow.
Yeah.
Wow. In which I was wowed when we did whatever we did event we did together not too long ago. I was wowed by you then. So, and our cabins are only 4 hours away. So if you're ever in Branson when we're there, we'll take you to dinner and catch up and tell you what all we've been doing on this stuff so far.
Yes, for sure.
Awesome.
And just continue building that big world. You're doing awesome.
Yeah. Klarissa, you awed us, and we've been investors for 30 years.
Yeah.
So thank you. We appreciate you so much.
Yes. Thank you for having me today.
Thanks for listening today. If you haven't already, please subscribe and share this podcast with others. The greatest compliment you can give us is to leave a 5-star review. And please feel free to reach out to us at info@lindamckissack.com. We would love to hear from you about any ideas, topics, or guests to include on our podcast. So see you next time.